Please welcome the Aerospace Corporation, sponsoring company of today's panel, What If? The Future of Space Logistics. Welcome to the stage, Randy Kendall, Vice President, Launch, Missiles, and Mobility.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to introduce the panel, What If? The Future of Space Logistics. Now, this particular audience is probably more aware than most of the value of space logistics. And as General Shaw, I guess he's not here anymore, but he very eloquently outlined this morning how for decades U.S. space operations were primarily static and defined by large single-purpose satellites that didn't really need a logistics chain. So, as we all know, times are changing. We have the rise of mega constellations, automation, artificial intelligence, the interdependency of commercial and government space programs, and the need to operate in an increasingly crowded and dynamic space environment. So we need space systems that can adapt, reconfigure, and respond to rapidly changing situations. It's about moving beyond rigid structures and embracing agility. This is a fundamental shift that requires us to rethink how we design, operate, and manage our assets in orbit. The next few decades promise an unprecedented transformation in our relationship with space. We're not just talking about venturing further, we're talking about living and working there, envisioning self-sustaining lunar habitats, asteroid mining operations, Mars colonization. But to get there, we need a robust ecosystem supported by a space-based logistics infrastructure to achieve these ambitious goals. Building infrastructure on orbit, creating manufacturing capabilities, these are essential steps for sustainable expansion. And we must address the growing demands also placed on our satellites and satellite operations. The rise of mega constellations presents both challenges and opportunities, and so we need to find innovative ways to enhance satellite operations, optimize orbital traffic management, and ensure the responsible and sustainable use of space for all. The stakes are high, and logistics-supported dynamic space operations with the ability to operate flexibly and adaptively in space will be crucial for our national security, scientific discovery, and economic growth. So in all that in mind, it's my pleasure to turn the discussion over to our illustrious panel, to be moderated by Carol Craig, CEO of Sidus Space. Take it away, Carol.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you sticking around till the end of the day to listen to us and participate with us. I'm excited to have this panel here today, and I love the topic of what if. I think a lot of us are thinking that, what if? And so, as mentioned before, I think what we want you to do is imagine a future 10 to 30 years out. I think some of us are at an age like myself that I'm not sure I can go 30, but I'll go 10 to 20 or so. But either way, imagine that future 10 to 30 years out where space logistics and infrastructure are no longer that what if, but it's in reality. So what does that look like? As mentioned, a couple of the examples mentioned earlier, but refueling stations and repair depots in orbit will be as common as gas stations are on Earth. Hundreds of launches, we see a lot right now, but hundreds of launches occurring each year with Starship, New Glenn, Dream Chaser, and similar large space vehicles built for mass production going to LEO, CHEO, Moon, and Mars. In-space manufacturing is a norm where we produce all the tools and the equipment on demand, and we're no longer solely reliant on terrestrial supply chains. Autonomous spacecraft provides real-time surveillance, transportation, and support in the most remote corners of space. And commercial space capabilities are fully integrated into the execution of national security missions. In this world, launch costs become very affordable, with high amounts of tankers launching daily to refill fuel depots and allow space vehicles to reach far orbits. And commercial space stations are numerous and affordable. So this is the world that our distinguished panel we'll explore today. And so to start with, I'm going to make some introductions here. Again, thank you guys so much for being a part of this panel. I'm going to start with, I'm going to bounce around just so you know. I don't like to keep things like boring and normal, right? So I look at Dave. You made eye contact, so you win. So I'm going to introduce Dave. Thank you for being here. Dave Jungkind is the Chief Revenue Officer and Special Programs Lead for Advanced Space, which is a leading space tech solutions company. Dave is responsible for national security, civil, and commercial portfolios and brings over 30 years of industry experience as a trusted strategist, technologist, and leader. Dave's experience also includes leading business development and strategy for Seeker and Blue Canyon Technologies, serving as the Director of Space and Avionics Encryption Products for General Dynamics Mission Systems, and serving and supporting AFTAC, the Air Force Tactical Application Center. Again, welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to Kelle. Thank you again for being here, Kelle. Kelle Wendling's 30-year career has positioned her as a leader in aerospace and defense. She most recently served as the president of the Space Systems Sector for L3Harris Technologies. In this role, she led an organization with a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of exquisite and responsive satellite capabilities across civil, defense, and intelligence industries. Prior to this role, Kelle was president of the L3Harris Air Traffic Control Sector and provided sector leadership for Department of Defense, international, and intelligence and cyber customers. Again, thank you. Dr. Lacy. Dr. Seth Lacy is the senior scientist for space mobility and precision maneuver at the Air Force Research Laboratory. He serves as the department's principal scientific authority and independent researcher for the development of new technologies in support of space mobility and precision maneuver. He joined AFRL in 2002 and has led teams to develop space technologies as well as space flight testing. Thank you. And last but not least, just because you're sitting right next to me and I like to end up that close, there you go, is Erik Daehler. He's the Senior Vice President of Sierra Space Defense, where he's responsible for development, production, and innovation of satellites and spacecraft. He brings 24 years of aerospace and defense experience with a broad background in program management, business development, and product innovation. Prior to joining Sierra Space, Erik led the Protected Communications Mission Area in Lockheed Martin's Military Space Organization with customers that included the U.S. Space Force, U.S. Navy, go Navy, beat Army, and Space Development Agency. Sorry. Welcome. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here. Very excited. Oh, let's cover that. Very excited for our conversation. So, to begin with, ahead of this panel, you knew this, I asked each of you, of all the future set movies and TV series set in space, tell me which depicts where you believe space is going or will be going over the next few decades. And if you would, tell us what you selected, and then please share a bit about why you selected what you selected for those who may not be familiar with your choice. And I'm going to start with Seth.
Great. Okay. So there were so many to choose from, and you know, we had a lot of commonality in our choices. I'll start with the Expanse, and the reason I picked that, you know, there's aliens and things like that, which are probably not as interesting, but they do have a vision for what high mobility travel around the solar system could look like if you could propulse at 1G all the time. And so that's, you know, a key, part of the storytelling element in the Expanse, and I think shows us what a future of high mobility platforms could look like.
Excellent. Kelle?
Okay, well, I picked For All Mankind. It's a great episode, and if you haven't seen the storyline, they actually hypothesize and flip the script on what happened with the space race and the moon landing, and the US is in an underdog position. They actually galvanize themselves around this singular mission, which is what I really aspire for us to do for the next 10 to 20 years, is to all work in collaboration and achieve great technical performance at the same time that they are achieving an accelerated timeline that is unheard of. And they do that with both Moon and Mars, and I think that's exactly where we find ourselves today. We've talked a lot today about all the challenges that face us, but I absolutely have no doubt that we can be able to address them and have a successful outcome similar to the series.
Awesome, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, so mine, I actually went for extra credit. I had to pick two. But Ad Astra and the Europa report, in that order. So Ad Astra is a story about expanding out into the solar system and utilizing Mars and the moon as a launching point for further exploration. And one of the things about the movie, other than it was incredibly, to my wife's opinion, boring, I think she fell asleep in about the first 7 or 8 minutes, it showed some of the challenges in space. But the Europa report is a beautiful movie about actually going to Europa, hence the name, and discovering what might be on that planet. So that's the reason why I picked those two.
Again, last but not least, Erik.
So I didn't listen to the instructions, and I picked a book instead of a movie, although I'm really hoping that it becomes a movie or miniseries. I chose 7 Eves. So 7 Eves has a wonderful premise that the entire Earth has to rally behind a crisis for which space is a solution. And it drives innovation, technology, collaboration, multinationalism, all of the things that you need to accelerate our technology readiness levels and all of our production readiness levels so we can solve this crisis. It's a wonderful read, great audiobook if you haven't the time to read it.
Awesome. I hope you guys all wrote those down. I know there's a couple that I hadn't seen. For All Mankind is one of my favorites, so I binge watched that. So thank you guys very much. I appreciate that. So as we think about our space logistics, one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what parallels or analogies do you expect to see between our terrestrial logistics and our space-based logistics? You want to start?
I'll start with terrestrial logistics transition with the conversation that General Shaw shared with us this morning. The correlation between the first instantiation of a technology and the better instantiation. There was a time when the thought of using an airplane to transport tuna to a restaurant across the world was insane. And now we do it every single day. So the idea of using space transportation as a logistics source to transport something from one side of the Earth to the other, gosh, 45 minutes is a lot faster than 18 hours. Mm-hmm. I could see a transition or a transformation that looks a lot like 1920s view of air traffic and air flight. The idea of putting mail on a plane to now we're shipping everything around the globe. So I think we're at that very beginning cusp of what space travel looks like.
Awesome. Anyone else want to go next?
I got 2 actually. So I look at the maritime and how important it was for for the global economy to be able to move services and goods over the ocean. And they had depots. Obviously, we need depots in space, and we need rule and traffic management and all that stuff. But the point I really want to drive home is the point of the military. We have to have a way to protect from bad actors. We have to be able to observe behaviors. We have to be able to defend our national interests in that. And the importance of that in space is essential. I mean, traffic management right now in space is incredibly challenging. The further out you go, it gets even harder. But when you start implementing dynamic space operations, which some of you probably already know, it's really hard to manage that. So building that infrastructure so we can maintain good behaviors and protecting our global interests as we expand into the universe.
And Kelle, anything?
Yeah, no, actually, I think Dave said it well. We are sitting in a time in our world where we are at the precipice of being able to change and reimagine how we do everything. And as we heard on the earlier panels today, there's a lot of discussion about how are we going to get through all of these challenges? How are we going to get through acquisition? How are we going to get through regulation? How are we going to get through budgeting? We need to make sure that we recognize that the action is upon us as industry as well as the government to work together to be able to solve these problems. And then the art of the possible is really opened up to all of us. It's one of the reasons why I answered For All Mankind, because I actually feel that they had a very good approach. And of course, they didn't have to go get a budget, so at least they didn't address that in the series. But there are challenges and certain things that they needed to go do that we needed to work together to be able to be successful. So that's why I think we're headed in the right direction. But we really do have some hurdles. We just need to be able to overcome them.
I like the art of the possible. I mean, that is for sure what we're in. So Seth, what do you think?
I think we talked earlier today about the transition from sailing to steamships, and I think that's a good analogy. I think another interesting thread to think about is we don't put car manufacturing plants on top of iron ore mines. We have them, in other places, and that's going to, I think, that same transition from today we ship nearly finished goods into space, and we've come a ways. We have deployable solar panels and antennas. So okay, the thing that you launch is not necessarily the thing that you need in space, but it's pretty close. I think we're going to start moving more and more towards launching pieces and assembling them. The space station is a good example of that. To launching raw materials and manufacturing in space. And I don't know how what the path is going to look like between here and there, but that's going to be a pretty exciting transition when we can get to more generic assembly and manufacturing of things in space and shipping raw materials up.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so this next one's a little bit longer. Appreciate that. What opportunities do you see for accelerating and enhancing commercial investment to support the Department of Defense and NASA in meeting their missions? How can government policies, partnerships, or initiatives incentivize private sector involvement and innovation in this domain? That was really long, but at least I gave you the read ahead on this so you know what the question is, right? Okay. Dave, you want to start?
Okay, yeah, I've been involved in commercial space for most of my career, and there's been a lot of great successes. And I want to highlight one that it's personally important to me is the Iridium. There's 2 major contracts that Iridium received to provide beyond line of sight comms that for anybody that's in the military or serving abroad has probably used an Iridium phone. But one thing in common with those 2 contracts is multi-year. They were able to buy multi-year, and that's important. So when you're going to your shareholders or your board of directors, in the case of Iridium, you've got to do a business case to spend an enormous amount of capex to procure a LEO constellation, and launch wasn't cheap back then, and it's now. So for personally, it also provides services. So my dad's over 80. He owns a ranch in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and he has no comms there. I'm petrified he's going to get hurt someday. So we got him a little Garmin system that attaches to Iridium. I know exactly where he is, so God forbid if something happens. So, but yeah, I think having these multi-year contracts, more than just what the NGA is doing for Maxar and some of the other, and then also what they're doing for SATCOM. If they can replicate that for refueling services, repair services, and some of that, you'll see a surge of venture capital and private equity moving into the market.
Yeah, sure. No, I'll add to that. On one of the earlier panels today, one of the questions came up, and I think it's a very interesting question. Does the U.S. government have to own everything that they put into space, right? And I think from a logistics standpoint, the answer is no. Certainly there are a number of services, and we've proven it with launch. We have a ways to go on some of these other capabilities in this what-if scenario. However, if they had a services model, they could be able to buy services and be able to leverage a lot of different capabilities. And maybe, as Seth said, it's not a 100% solution, but it's an 80% solution. I would imagine if we actually canvassed the commercial space portfolios and saw what those solutions look like as a starting point for the next set of requirements we need to write versus what we typically do, which is more of a down and in, bottoms up kind of exquisite specification documentation.
Agree with that.
So I can speak directly as a venture capital backed mid-sized startup. Sierra Space raised $1.7 billion of VC funding with a really outstanding contract mechanism supported by NASA, which is a multi-year, multi-buy, 7-mission commitment to the Dream Chaser as the anchor tenant of that venture capital backing. And then a strong business case diversified with multiple customers across defense, commercial, and civil, with a really strong, robust strategy that helps bring that VC money in.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Pick up on I think there's a huge variety of public-private partnerships, and we've done a few, some notable successes, and we were looking at spaceports as an example, looking towards airports and maritime. I think there are some lessons learned there that we could bring to bear for the spaceport version of bringing together private capital, local, state, and federal investment, all to achieve a common goal of getting a new spaceport or something like that accomplished. And I don't know if there are any space lawyers in the audience. I think that the legal regime for space could use some work. So hopefully we can, I hesitate to ask for more lawyers, but hopefully we can get some more legal footing so that private can invest in space, and some of these, further out mining and resource extraction activities can be successful.
The good news is these lights are in our eyes, so you can't tell if anyone's giving you dirty looks because of what you just said, so that's good news. Awesome. Thank you. So this is the point where we're going to get a little political, but not really political, right? We're going to think bipartisan and that kind of thing. So we're going to play a brief clip of Senator Roger Wicker, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, speaking at the Seth confirmation hearing that was earlier this month. So if they can go ahead and play that clip.
Yet a risk-averse DoD culture has kept too many promising technologies on the wrong side of the so-called valley of death. That tenuous period between experimental prototypes and production contracts. Defense companies backed by venture capital receive less than 1% of defense contracts.
Okay, so what's your reaction to that clip, to the comments, and how can that valley of death be overcome? So, Kelle, you want to start?
I can go ahead and start with that. I think most of us probably resonate with what the senator is talking about. I suspect that the majority of us in this room have had a program that did not make it across that said valley of death. Truly, how we are working with the requirements of these programs, it really has to be not an experimental system. He used the word experimental, and I think that's part of the challenge. When we are using some of these new Vanguard type programs, it becomes experimental, and then the program of record is going on alongside of it and simultaneously. Then you try to insert a very hard left into what has already been a very stoic, straight-laced type of traditional acquisition for a program of record, and you're really not going to be able to get those two things to converge. So we absolutely have to make sure that if we're going to go forward with these experiments, there is a true insertion path for them, and it's not just a trial balloon or something that's not going to go forward from there.
I think I know why experimental showed up in his language. A lot of the investment funds for early seed investments leading up to the Valley of Death go to small business, innovative research commitments. And the mid-size companies that have matured and spent time building their business plan often don't have access to those funds. And so you get this combined quick insertion of money, let's go build a first demo, but then the real production capacity and the CapEx to turn that into a program of record or into a production system is limited.
Very true.
So we need a gap in that phase.
Yeah, for me it's interesting, and it's a function of like the cost to get a kilogram on orbit. Back in the 80s, it was like $80,000 a kilogram with the shuttle and Titans around 20. It was such a gamble. You had to do it, and you had to do it perfectly. So I would say the behaviors for having exquisite systems in a domain that wasn't as challenging as today was a factor of like the cost to launch. But gratefully, SpaceX is around 3,000 now per kilogram in LEO, and Starship's going to drop it under 1,000. I don't know by how much, but it totally changed the paradigm around to where you can, be risky. So one of the risk items, like I said, there's a lot of failure going on even in like the Starlink constellation. The infant mortality on orbit is, in the roughly 10%. It's not an official number, but it's what I've was able to find on the internet. But I mean, can you imagine 10% failure in 1980? I mean, it will be out of a job. So really, it's a function of launch access. It's really enabled that valley of death to get a little bit less far.
I'll pick up looking at it from the S&T point of view, the successes are usually maybe 100% a result of a really tightly knit team between requirements, acquisitions, operations, warfighters, and S&T. And so if you can bring those groups together, all working towards the same thing, you can have success, and you can do it pretty quickly. I think if you only have part of that group, then it gets really hard. But I think bridging those gaps is really important to getting that transition success. It doesn't always make sense. There are times when you're, particularly in the lab environment, where you're working on something that, for low dollar amounts, that you're like, gosh, this could be transformative, but it's TRL2. It's so uncertain about how this is going to go. That's probably too early to involve the warfighter, maybe in concepting, but bridging that gap too early can also be a bit of a waste of time. But bringing those integrated teams together, I think, is the recipe for success.
Awesome. Okay, keeping it political. How do you guys see the space industry progressing over the next 4 years under this new administration? Who wants to start? Go ahead.
I think that the last 5-10 years has been transformative in space. When I first came to AFRL in 2002, things were pretty stagnant. ULA was formed just a few years later. SpaceX was founded in 2003 or 5 or something like that. So things were coming, but it was a pretty stagnant time, and as compared to today. And I think there will be some industry consolidation. That looks like that's coming. I don't think that's going to slow our roll. I think that there is a lot of momentum in space across civil and commercial and defense.
Yeah. I think you're hearing an awful lot from the Space Force and the Pentagon about our ability to maintain our space superiority. And so I do think that there's going to be a renewed commitment to ensuring that we can get the budgets and the acquisition leverage that we need to be able to go field some of these capabilities, knowing that some of our superiority is already at risk from near-peer adversaries.
Yeah, I'm actually very bullish on it. I mean, looking under the first administration, he was completely committed into returning folks to the moon and getting off to Mars. He understands the importance of the Space Force. He hired Jared Iserman to run NASA. I mean, is a private astronaut. So I mean, I think he's embracing the need for looking things differently, looking at commercial by some of the people he's surrounding him by, but also he understands the importance to not lose our global influence. I mean, it was earlier today. We need a budget that's 2 times bigger than we are today to just to sort of keep up with what's our near peers in the industry. And I'm hopeful that that commitment financially, so we can crush it when we have to do our job and protect our warfighters. It's not going to be money that's going to be the reason why we can't do our jobs. It's going to be for other things.
I guess I'll take the questions that arose in multiple different panels. One was about the discussion about SAML and the budget for SAML. Yes, that was a news story, but one of the things we've seen is just because that's how it came out of committee doesn't mean that that's what's actually going to get budgeted. So I think there will be some more line item veto-like influence of this is a critical capability, our warfighters need it. I understand that Congress didn't put it in, but we're going to go in and drive action to make that possible. So I'm optimistic that we'll see funding come in to support the warfighter domain in space.
Overall, pretty positive. But this is just kind of that follow-on. Is there anything that we should be just not wary of? I don't want to make it, it's not negative, it's positive, but just kind of have our eye on? Or is it really, the trajectory is upward?
So space has a lot of materials, components, and hardware that comes internationally. And there could be some unintended consequences to access to things like titanium. Titanium is a precious resource that is really hard to get, and it turns out it's long lead on our parts. So we have to be careful about unintended consequences of things in our supply chain.
Yeah, that's great answer. Any others? Yep, excellent. Go ahead, Dave.
No, I mean, a lot of stuff's out of our control. We don't really know what Russia was going to do before they invaded Ukraine. So I mean, so we can have a crazy Ivan thrown in at this administration and totally, change what we have to do. So anyway, that's really my concern is more what's happening on the outside than what's happening on the inside.
Sure.
I think it's interesting and telling that he has Elon Musk as a close confidant and now the Department of Government Efficiency. I'm really interested to see what they're going to do with this department. I think there are actually areas where they can do some very good activity for the organization. If you look at what SpaceX has been able to do, and granted they have a billionaire backing them and they don't have quarterly earnings, so he's got a little bit going for him, but it's absolutely changed the way and the face of launch, from accessibility to affordability to just the pace that he's been able to do it. So we have to owe a debt of credit to what SpaceX has been able to do, and I think with Elon Musk close, I think space will get the attention that it deserves.
I'll highlight again the supply chain discussion. I think we're getting better at managing. Space Development Agency has done a really good job, and with purpose and intent, we are going to have independent, separate suppliers. We're going to have more than one for everything we do. Even with that, malice and intent going in, there are commonality in the supply chain across some of the things that they're building, and that has been highlighted as we're trying to scale the industry. I think there are going to be more things like that we're going to discover. I think during COVID, we had liquid oxygen turned out to be a supply chain limiter for launch. I think there are going to be more things like that as we scale. Some of them we know today, some of them we're probably ignorant of, and we'll learn as they make themselves apparent.
Awesome. Excellent. Okay, so what opportunities do you see that could enhance satellite operations to support the growing demands of constellations and enable the expansion of the Cislunar economy? We're talking about lunar now. How can industry and government collaboration help accelerate these developments?
I'll pick
you guys
one
are both staring at me
really quick one.
Two of you are working this, I can see. Go ahead.
So first, I think you have to discuss standards for things like refueling. If we're going to be able to have dynamic space operations, we need to pick a standard, pick a fuel, and start running at it. And we've spent 10 years plus dithering on if we're going to have a standard, what it looks like. The government can help us here by setting a demand signal and saying, this is how we're going to buy, this is the standard that we can use, and then industry can come together and say, here's the best way of doing this, here's a fueling system that we like and we pick. So if I had one choice, I would say pick standards and start running.
Yeah.
USB-C.
That's funny. Yeah, to answer your question, one of the things I noticed is building the operations infrastructure to manage constellations and the enormous amount of satellites that these lower cost launch vehicles are going to enable is going to be challenging. So I got to look at the Valkyrie as a great example of the trusted wingman. That's an AI/ML plane, augmenting an F-35 to do missions that really are unheard of. But I kind of look at the AI/ML agent that an operator can use to do real-time conjunction assessment when things happen, or if a dynamic space maneuver happens, they don't have to, it's frees up, so you get one person can do the work at 10 or 20. And I think that's going to be essential. And really, even more challenging is when you add the complexity of DSO, but when you add, RPO or refueling, there's a whole slew of challenges that go along with that. So figuring out a way to minimize this, scalability, so operators don't have to scale as fast as the constellations.
Yeah. Think about the warfighter on that exact example. The space at Schriever is full. They have to take a computer out to bring a new computer in. Mm-hmm. How are you going to put another operator to do an RPO mission? You have to train AI/ML to do that for us so we can take most of the rote work out of their job and give them the really hard work. I think you're right on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Erik said it well, right? He picked one thing, but there is a wide open expanse in front of us of what could be the art of the possible again. And a little direction from the government. I would love to tell you I used 6 different space buses and 4 different kinds of propulsion when I was running the space sector at L3. And I kept getting the question about why can't you just use one? There's no one size fits all in space. There's no build to inventory. People are not going to do that. And the underlying supply chain, as Seth pointed out, is very tenuous at best. And so you absolutely need to make sure that you have at least some direction so that you have you're not going to get a reference design. I'd love to tell you there's going to be a reference design for a space bus. It's not coming. It's a commercialized or almost commoditized approach at this point, but it's a very high-end commoditized element. And therefore, we're going to have to make sure that we get a little bit of direction from the government on a few of these key, which direction do you want to head in, so that we can be able to build the right architectures and have the right public-private conversations in between us to be able to take it to the next level.
I think that space is both easier and harder than the terrestrial. So it's really big. So that, okay, collisions are probably harder to, there are fewer of them. That's great. However, it's repetitive, so the probabilities happen over and over and over and over indefinitely. So that adds a challenge. You don't have as many crazy humans driving their cars on the roads in space. So I think that is most of the space systems are going to be autonomous in the sense of, yeah, a human's going to tell them where to go maybe or something like that, but they're going to get there on their own, which is very different than driving around in Florida where you have no idea what the other guy is doing or why. So I think there's some benefit to having fully automated systems in space, that they will become more predictable and easier to manage than crazy humans on the Earth.
Everyone picks on Florida drivers. So easy, isn't it? That's all right. Okay, so what policies would you recommend the U.S. government adopt in order to support more commercial innovation in space? And we've kind of hit on a little bit of this, but I think we're really talking about the policies, which maybe we still need to.
I think earlier today we talked about, acquisition and budget are big chunks that need to be taken a look at. But we even went into regulation or partnership with the FAA for access to space, or environmentals, or noise, right? There's a number of things. We need to make sure that we're focused on those big rocks. And I think if we could look at a different type of business model that the DoD could employ, maybe along the services line of work. It's a lot easier to procure services with kind of a known consistent budget than it is to sell a major bespoke system acquisition and be able to get the support for a budget for that for a new program of record. So I think there's a different way to look at it, but we really need that public-private partnership. And I was a little disenchanted on one of the earlier panels where they spoke about the fact that that's still a little bit of a contentious relationship, and we have to figure out how to solve that. When I was running the FAA business for L3Harris, we had a public-private partnership. I think that is paramount, because you need a consortium of the willing to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to corral everybody who's playing in the space. But absolutely something we need to do to make sure that we get a budget set. And then, like I said, if you could do it on services, even some of those services could be continuing operations, vital to national security, maybe even exempt from a continuing resolution, which would be excellent, because China doesn't have a CR.
Building on your discussion about the FAA, I think the FAA has come a long way. And we've had some huge successes in the launch side and the reentry side as well, being able to bring things back from space. I think there's room for maturation of tools. So if we can start building out some more automation in the regulatory process, I think that will make things more transparent for everyone and faster. So a lot of the analysis that we do for frequency licensing is another one. This is I have been shown the book. These are the steps that one goes through, and these are what you check. It is a very prescribed process. This is ripe for automation. So I think there's some technology that can come help with that.
Very true.
So I'm going to hit on acquisition, because the way that your customers buy drives the behavior of the suppliers of the product. And acquisition reform, I know, is the language that we don't use anymore from previous experience, but we do need to change some of the way we acquire. The best contracts I've had with customers who've set win-win terms and conditions, who understand what motivates companies, and you set up really outstanding contracts relationships are awesome. We still don't know how to contract for things like services in space.
Agreed.
So it'd be outstanding if we could say, sell a service, like I'm making up refueling again because we talked about it a couple of times. If we could give a price tag and not have the anti-deficiency requirements of I can't sign multi-year commitments to service, but say I'm going to buy 250,000 pounds of hydrazine every X number of units of time, and we will commit to that as a government, then companies will show up with gas stations in space.
Yeah, every point they said is exact. I won't repeat it, but there are some policy decisions that I just don't fully understand. I'm all about Cislunar, advanced space is very focused on the Cislunar domain. But one of the policies that's interesting is that disposal. Prior to not too long ago, disposal was on the lunar surface, and now that they're making it a policy to not do that. So if anyone's done the math on how heavy delta V is to get into a cislunar orbit, you'll understand even at $3,000 to get to LEO, it's a lot more to get to GEO and to Cislunar. So yeah, some of these policies don't make sense, and we're handcuffing ourselves. I mean, we're the only country that has signed up, I believe, to do this, but our adversaries and our near peers are, doing disposal orbits theoretically on like Lunar 25, but I mean also like putting assets and disposing them on the surface of the moon. So,
that's a good point.
I mean, there's keep out things. I want to make sure the Apollo sites are clean and will be clean for millions of years, but they're, that's just my opinion. Let's be smart about it.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question that we've got, and then I'm going to go to the audience questions here. So the last one of ours that we're going to talk about is, what do you see as the one bottleneck that, if addressed, could help unlock the full potential of the space economy? The meaning of life in the space industry.
I think launch is still the problem. I think we've come so far, and we had over 100 launches last year. I think that is still the linchpin of all the challenges of leading to space. So I think we've come a long way. I think we still have more to go on access to space.
I think it's consistency of budget and just that known ability to know when you're asking your commercial organizations to invest, because it might not be a program of record, they need to have known returns and understand what the revenue outlook looks like over the coming years. And I just don't think we're able to give that certainty today that allows us to keep that inflow going, other than knowing that the space economy is in a growth mode.
I'm going to go with launch. I think we have like 30 spaceports out there, but really squeezing the most out of those systems. There are a lot of novel techniques and orbits that will allow you to service the geobelt that can be launched at higher latitudes than, say, what was in Florida. So, and even do a cislunar ride share. So like exploring and leaning a little bit over your skis a bit on some techniques that allow you to fully utilize the infrastructure for launch. And more importantly, resiliency. So in case things get busy in certain parts of the world, we still have access. Anytime you want to get to GEO, you'll still have the access to get to GEO.
So I'm going to go with unleashing the human capital that is this next generation working for us. We had a mental model that failure was not acceptable, and it created 50 years of amazing performing, never failing systems that cost billions of dollars. And I just look at how the Ukrainians have responded with asymmetric cost responses to old ways of doing business. The next generation workforce is doing the same thing. I've seen more innovation come just by taking the leash off and saying run. So.
Excellent. Great answer.
Yeah. Any other? Nope.
Well, that was a great answer, and I agree. The risk tolerance that we have is not where it needs to be, and we need to reimagine why we're doing it the way we're doing it. Why are we doing it that way?
I love that. So there's some good questions in here. One involves a space elevator. I don't know who put that in there, but we're not gonna talk about that one. That's cool though. What does it look like if Destination Moon is abandoned over the next 4 years in favor of Mars? So, I guess that's that. What if, do you believe that's going to happen? What if it does happen? Just what are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, could I go first? Because I like I said, I love the moon. But it'd be like saying Destination Midway wasn't important to win World War II. let's be honest, we needed Midway, and we spent a lot of capital and and treasure to get that. So the moon, it might not be quite as glamorous as finding life on Mars and settling permanently on a planet like that. But the resources, that's why I like the Ad Astra movie. I mean, it's 1/6 of gravity. It's easier to get things into space, and they have the ability to make fuel there. So the math makes sense. So I would say, I would give it the Midway analogy. I mean, we won the war because we went after Midway.
Other thoughts?
I think from a national security space perspective, Dave's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You cannot forego the moon. Our near-peer adversaries are not going to. We cannot leave that as a vulnerability in our arsenal.
Excellent.
Yeah. I'm terrified of the thought that things can come out of Cislunar and we'll have no idea. It's like not even understanding the deep ocean and blue water battles, and all of a sudden there's U-boats and you didn't plan them. Mm-hmm. How can we miss Cislunar as an observation node, as a protection mechanism to those really hard to detect spots in space, and get distracted over here by Mars? And I do think Mars is a distraction. I think it's too resource intensive. I know that's heretical, but let's focus on the things that are close to us and resource-wise we can achieve in the near term.
Seth?
I think actually back to the space lawyers who may or may not be in the audience. There's a lot of resource available on the moon, and we've found evidence of all kinds of marketable goods on the surface of the moon. So I think that if we can have the correct property rights construct to allow those to be mined and used, I think that the moon is going to be a very popular destination, both to go and to go make money. So I think the moon is here to stay unless we do something incredibly wrong with the space lawyers.
Well, and I think the question comes up because of Elon Musk's potential influence. And so one of these questions kind of ties to that, not necessarily exactly that, but could such close ties to Elon Musk run the risk of small companies being closed out of the market? Or do we think that's not necessarily a reality? Any thoughts or concerns there?
Monopolies are never good.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I think he would have respect, hopefully, for smaller companies because that's where they started from and they grew up and built it. Hopefully that he would respect that they are in the economy for the space travel and space tourism elements, and that hopefully that would quell any of his need to want to take over as a monopoly. And so he's way out far ahead, but I don't know that he's turned off to competition. Yeah. I'm not sure he even views it as competition.
Yeah.
There's a lot of competition in launch. I mean, anyone seen the New Glenn launch recently? It was spectacular. It was successful, and that's going to be part of the arsenal of launch. I hate to use the word arsenal, but launch access. But you got Firefly out there and Rocket Lab. There's a whole slew of companies that are investing to because launch is never going to go away. 20,000 LEO SATCOM satellites between Kuiper and Starlink alone is more than what Elon can launch. So having that competition is good, and that's my opinion. I'm not worried about it. Bring it on.
I don't think that we've found the ideal right answer for launch. So I think there's a lot of room for a lot of different, both in scale. I think fuels. I think we're still working our way through what makes the most sense from a fuels perspective for launch. I think that there's a lot of room for innovation in the launch front.
Yeah. What's the cliche, rising tide lifts all ships kind of a thing? I mean, I think we need that in our industry. We need to all be on board, that everyone is successful. So there's a couple questions in here, and I get this all the time when I'm doing my briefs for investors for the public company thing. It's always about orbital debris. And it's usually, some of them it's just because they don't know what else to ask. And that's okay, because it is a concern. And so there are a couple in here. I mean, how are we going to be managing orbital debris in 20 years? And I would say, what does it look like? So that's, again, it's an important question. Anyone?
Lasers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Laser, yeah. Take it up.
And
just create even more tiny little pieces of orbital debris.
Little pieces hurt up there. One thing is I'm very proud of the government investing in VLEO. I think it's essential for our nation to have the ability to maintain a permanent presence in the VLEO for a lot of reasons. Space debris scares the heck out of me, especially around Cislunar. I mean, a mistake in a Cislunar creating a debris cloud, three-body orbital dynamics could make the moon very challenging for humans to safely get there, let alone what happens to that debris when it sits in the trajectory back to the Earth. So, but anyway, I think VLEO, but having great situational awareness so you can be smart about avoiding these and having the AI ML tools that will help manage conjunctions as efficiently and optimized as possible will be helpful as well. It'd be essential, actually.
I think it's conceivable that you could see a new market opportunity open up, which is to go get space debris out of the way in space. There was a lot of conversations about it previously when we were looking at space domain awareness and how many objects we track on a daily basis, of how much of that do we need to be concerned about and what should we do about it? And is there somebody who's got the big vacuum cleaner for space to go clean it all up? I think there's a services model that might come out and be a new opportunity space. We just haven't seen it yet mature.
I think I feel weird being the tech guy bringing up the space lawyers all the time. I think salvage rights are interesting, and that there's, we spend thousands of dollars per kilogram to put those kilograms into space. It feels weird to spend a lot of effort to put them back down again. Can't we use them while they're there? We spent a lot of pain and suffering getting them up there. I think VLEO is another interesting regime, aggressively self-cleaning orbit. That if we can learn to operate there, that's an entirely new regime that's sort of air and sort of space. I think that's an exciting regime to go and take a look at that doesn't have debris concerns. But I think making use of what's up there is a really nice answer if we can figure out how to recycle your used spacecraft.
I'll take a callback to one of the earlier questions of what policy change. Cosmos 2499 broke apart, still flagged as a Russian asset. No one can touch that asset if the Russians do not agree with them removing that piece of debris. That's a great example of policy. If there's something up there that is causing harm or potential harm, it should be removable.
Yeah.
Or reusable.
Maritime, there's a very extensive legal basis for how you go do salvage in the deep ocean. Maybe there are some analogs there that we could use in the space domain.
We like the analog in the Dream Chaser side where we helped borrow some of the Russian design from one of their pieces of flotsam in the ocean. So maybe you're right.
So again, a little bit related. There's a comment, given a future of cost-effective and reusable upmass, how do you envision, or do you envision, a circular economy of downmass applications? And that's a little bit, I think, like what you were mentioning, right?
So we're, as expensive as it is to get things into space, it is more expensive to bring them down. And we're progressing on that front in a few different areas, and I think there's a point-to-point has a lot of application, and we're excited to see how that progresses. And I think manufacturing goods in space, there are probably companies in the audience here who are working on goods that need to be manufactured in space, and bring them back to Earth for use.
The entirety of our space economy theory is that downmass is nearly as cost efficient as upmass. You can't produce microgravity products and not have a way of bringing them down cost effectively. So that has to be part of the solutioning. I see each launch now has downmass associated with it. We heard some news today about, not only is Stoke thinking about all stages reusable, but creating a reentry system. That was pretty exciting. Yeah. I think we're in this beginning era where downmass is going to be as cost effective.
Agreed. Good. So I've got a question that's very popular here, because I can see the number of people that said, yes, we like it. What is the future of space logistics if the Space Force zeroes out funding for space mobility in the fiscal year 26 budget? How big of a setback would that be? Do we need to go to DC?
I thought this was supposed to be positive. I mean, that'd be, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't see how it works. I mean, the importance, it was mentioned one of our, geo assets, the GSAPs, we got to figure out how to get fuel up there so they can have a fighting chance to win this thing. That doesn't make sense. I don't know where that would come from, but yeah, not having space mobility as part of the key foundation on how we execute our mission to protect our warfighters nuts. One of the things I did, and Erik, you mentioned this earlier, let's pick one fuel. Let's figure that out. I mean, one of the things I always tell my friends is the golden rule applies. And if you work for the government and you're doing acquisition, you hold all the gold. So you can make the rule, you can make the decision, whatever it might be, and just live with it, because it would enable things. I mean, can you imagine how challenging it would be if you pulled up and you weren't sure what nozzle was diesel? I mean, I know my daughter would have tanked and ruined my car within a few hours of getting her license. So I think that's... I think that would be crazy not to have space mobility in the budget. Sorry.
No, that's good.
I'm terrified. The Chinese have chosen doctrine that says that space mobility and logistics is critical to the warfight in space. They've written about it. There's open papers about it. The SJ launch that was referred to this morning, if you read the Space News article on it, it's specifically designed to refuel other spacecraft. They will have the maneuver advantage in space if we don't keep up. So why would we not fund that?
Yeah. I think it would be incredibly short-sighted for us to zero out space mobility. To what Erik and Dave have just said, it absolutely is too much of a risk with our adversaries to not have some type of capability that we can put on orbit.
I think General Panzertank had some thoughts on this this morning, and I think we're going to move forward in this area. It's hard to align, like I mentioned earlier, the holy quadrinity of warfighters, requirements, acquisitions, and tech development. We're getting there, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And it's a work in progress.
So I think we're all in agreement that there's a lot of good stuff going on, right? There's some challenges, but a lot of us engineers and such, we love problems today. We're talking about we love to solve problems. Therefore, we will. So I would ask, we're 2 minutes in fourth quarter, anything that you guys want to add? Maybe let's say advice. How about that? As we look at the next 10, 20, 30 years, what's your advice to whomever, to companies, consumers, investors? What's your advice? On that note, I can't talk anymore.
All right, I'll go first. Be undaunted. There are a number of challenges out there, and we've talked about them all, as we said today, with acquisition and with budgets and with near-peer adversaries and challenges that go on from regulations and other things. We can solve this. There's nothing that we've identified, whether it's a procedural or a structural or a cultural problem that in the way that we do acquisition today, that would not be able to be abated and addressed. We just really need to all work together with a common singular purpose, and we need to focus on the fact that our near-peer adversaries are very much challenging our space superiority. So be undaunted in how you go forward, and don't take some of the negativity as we won't be successful in doing it.
Yeah, I'd be real quick on this one, but so the new space from going from risk avoidance to risk management, don't be afraid to say no to requirements. I mean, I love doing this to my engineers. I bring them one line and their heads explode. Where are all the requirements? Oh, you're the smartest people in the room. You figure out how to get there. But, that would be my thing. Understand what keeps your customer up at night versus what it was written in the requirements, because there's a loss in translation there, and, solve the real problem, and you'll be more successful than just trying to be compliant with every requirement.
I think we have a tendency to focus on thing. So we're going to launch a thing, or there's going to be a launch vehicle thing. And I think that's important, but maybe the bigger piece for the national economy is what's the foundational capability to make the thing. So it could be a factory. It's the human capital in this room. I was here yesterday as well. The conversations that I've had with all kinds of companies and investors who are looking at diverse and crazy, hopefully successful ideas. I think that's the underlying capacity that we need to grow. And yes, we still need to focus on the thing, and we need to do those, build the spacecraft, build the rockets, make the spaceports. Those are important. But the underlying capacity to do those things is what needs to be encouraged.
So I think keeping the vision that space is the ultimate high ground, that space superiority comes from the fact that we have been able to use it as holy ground for 50 plus years. We've held that advantage. That advantage is no longer ours. As a nation, as a coalition of partners, and space is being used in ways that we've never imagined. If we lose the vision that space must be the ultimate high ground for us, I'm afraid that we'll be outpaced by our near peer adversaries, and we'll have a very different outlook on life in 2040.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I was feeling like Jennifer Aniston on the morning show until I started choking on stage. It wasn't so cool anymore, but you guys are wonderful. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.